No, it was the kids.
All right. Welcome to the October meeting of the Alexander Board of Education. Can we have roll, please?
Jay,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yes.
Blake.
Yes. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I'm not sure over this.
I pledge allegiance to the Thank you. Up first, we have the adoption of the agenda with the addendum for items for board approval. We have item A, it's recommended the Board of Education accept the enclosed letter of resignation from Stacy Witham, effective October 12, 2022. So moved.
Seconded.
Roll.
Jay,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yes.
Blake.
Yes. For reports, we have the superintendent report.
Yes, wanted to start off talking about safety. October is, this year is first year that it's been recognized as School Safety Month. And so timely thing that we've had some issues with safety that we're revisiting. Early in the year, we had an incident reported on a bus. Actually came out to be not true, but caused enough of stir that we had to think about some of the procedures that we're using with bus safety in regard to situations and how we respond. We're working with some other agencies. We actually have some work that we're going to do with the Sheriff's Department on the 20th. The 20th is our Professional Development Day, so we're bringing in all of our drivers, and we're going to do some safety work with them as well. It's not just professional development for our teaching staff, but also take advantage of that time with the rest of our staff. Some of our health check procedures. At the beginning of the year, we had a situation with a young student, and this has caused us, it helped us learn a little bit about some of our practices and sharpen our focus. We're reporting more of those incidents that happen at a smaller level, especially with our younger kids. Bumps on heads, scrapes on knees, elbows, things like that. I think you may have received one of the notes.
My daughter, yes.
Your daughter you received a note about your daughter, and we're trying to be more responsive and aware of everyone's, they're our children, but when they go home, they're mom and dad's children, they're their precious. We want to make sure they know everything that happened during the day that we think they should know. So we've ramped up our procedures there. You can thank Ms. Rouse for that. She's done a very nice job in looking through the procedures and how all of that's been amped up a bit. With our safety drills, last week we conducted safety drills. We had two. We had one scheduled and one unscheduled. We had some ambitious kindergartners decide they were going to preempt the safety lockdown drill that we had with a fire drill because it was a nice day and we were lucky for that. But the boys, I'll give them this, they owned up to it fully. So there was no, they just bought it. They said, okay, yeah, that was us. So we learned a little bit from both of those drills. One of them being communication and how we're communicating as district administrators. We're going to talk this Friday, and we're going to learn a little bit more about our communications within the building and how we reach out to people and how we're connecting with each other to inform everyone of what's happening. We can do some things differently. We may actually need to get better technology because I think we've got a different array of radios that are being used through the district. So we're going to clean some things up there, make that more efficient, and we're going to practice on how to communicate with those radios in those situations. One other inadvertent safety item was water. We had a water main break. I'm sure you're all very well aware that we had a water main break. And when someone comes to my office and says, well, the water main just broke, we're not going to have water. First thing, this is 8 or 8:30 in the morning, we're not going to be able to cook. And then we're not going to be able to go to the restroom. So how do we handle that? Well, when they first constructed this school, there actually are cisterns here that store nearly 30,000 gallons of water. And for us, that would allow us to operate for 3 days. So we would have no interruption God forbid we'd get to that point, but we'd have no interruption of service for those 3 days. So, and the water is an important safety item. You have to have hygiene, and food. We're always looking for ways to improve. We appreciate feedback that we get from the public, from the staff, and from our students. You can always get better. So that is my point on safety and on October School Safety Month. The next item that I'd like to talk about are student representatives to the board. This conversation started a month or so ago, and we've continued to learn a little bit more about it. We actually have policy in place, but it's not something that's ever been implemented. Not at least that I'm aware of. Some of you guys who may have been around here longer than me, I'm looking in your general direction, might know if we've had student liaisons before, but I don't know that we have. Okay, all right. Well, that's something I'm going to learn more about. I know I think it's Voss, is very interested in this topic, and she shared some information with me, and we're going to get together and have a conversation and see what that might look like. It can come in a couple of different forms. It probably can come in more than just a couple, but you can actually have a student sit on the board, with the board, during a public meeting. You can do it in that manner, or you can also have a student report out to the board on a monthly basis. Those are the two examples that I'm aware of. There may be others, but we'll talk about that, and maybe I'll get with student council and talk with them as to maybe what they would see their involvement could be with board activities. Might be a nice learning opportunity. We just want to make sure we do it correctly. Last thing I want to do is to put a kid in a difficult spot. I know we've all had board meetings that have been difficult. I wouldn't want a kid to be in that spot. But I think there might be opportunities to learn in some other ways. So we'll give that a shot. We'll see what we can do. Next.
Do you mind if I jump in on that
Go right ahead.
conversation real quick? I'd just like to add, I reached out to a couple of districts, as well as Aaron Sherm. He'd been here for 16 years, sitting there. And he wasn't aware, he came here in 2006, and he wasn't aware of Alexander ever having one. Reached out to a couple more, and I guess in the early 2000s, we had some. And that kind of went away just out of lack of volunteers. No other issues. One of the big things as I just officially met Katie this evening, I think it brings a unique perspective that, especially in today's world, we have adults talking, and very rarely do we ask the students, and having that voice, I think, is something that would bring value to this board. So I'm interested to see how that would develop, what we want that to look like, and what you would want that to look like. So,
All right.
just wanted to add that.
Yep, so there'll be more to come on this. Lastly, but not least important, Mrs. Megan Carr is here. She's a curriculum director for the district, and she and I have been talking about the report card, and I know she's been working with staff very closely on breaking down the report card. The state report card was released a short time ago, and she's going to go through the results. And if you want to turn around, there's a display. If you're a visual learner, that'll help you a great deal. So, Ms. Carr?
Yeah, good evening. So the school report card was released about 2 to 3 weeks ago. For me, the school report card is a great time to look back and reflect on the things that we're doing well and the areas that we could look to improve going forward. We always have areas to improve, and I think the report card gives us a good basis for things to start focusing on for the next year and years to come in general. Our overall report card, they actually changed the structure. I don't know if you remember from years past, but the last several years, they've actually given us letter grades. The state of Ohio has changed that. They have now went to a star system. The star system is a 5-star system. It very much similar, it corresponds to a 5-letter grade system. 5 stars is the highest, 1 star is the lowest, and they technically say that 3 stars means they're meeting state expectations. So you can see if you look across ours, we have areas that are things that I believe are strengths of ours, and we have areas of things we can focus on and get better. The achievement, we had 3 stars. That means achievement is looking at proficiency levels. So how high are our students scoring on those tests? Progress, we had 5 stars. We were 5 out of 5. That's definitely a strength of ours. Progress is looking at the growth from years past. So are we showing growth no matter where they started? Are we showing at least a year's worth of growth with all of our students? Gap closing means are we closing the gap between our traditional performing students and all of our subgroups of students? We don't have a lot of subgroups here, but when we get to that component, I can explain that a little further. The graduation rate, we had 3 out of 5 stars. This is looking at the percentage of students who graduate in 4 or 5 years. And then the early literacy, we had 2 stars. And I would say early literacy is something that we have definitely started really focusing on, and I'll elaborate a little bit more when we go through that. On the bottom, you can see, so the overview on the top, that's our district report card. We actually get a building report card for each of our 2 buildings. We only have an elementary building, and the junior high and senior high is technically considered one building in the Department of Education's eyes. And you can see that the star system pretty much corresponded. The only real difference is the progress component. The elementary school had 4, if I'm remembering correctly. I cannot see that far, I apologize. I think elementary school had 4 and the junior high school had 5 for the progress component. Graduation rate's obviously a high school only measure. The K-3 literacy is an elementary only measure. So when we are comparing those ratings to the statewide distribution, these are looking at schools. So the red stars are our junior high school. The yellow stars are our elementary school. And you can kind of see where we fell in comparison to other school districts. For example, early literacy, or that K-3 literacy, that's a standard that across the state of Ohio, we're seeing a little bit of a decline in the last couple of years. And you can see that only 5% of districts in the state of Ohio got 5 stars on that component. But there were also areas where I feel that we performed very well compared to the state. For example, the progress component, you can see most of the schools kind of fell in the middle, and we fell on the higher end of that spectrum. It's just nice, I think, to look and have that general comparison of where are we comparing across the board to the state averages. Throughout the report card, they're going to reference similar districts. I think oftentimes we get caught up in comparing ourselves to the county or local schools, but we're all very different. When you compare us to Athens or Nelsonville or Trimble, we all have a very different population. We have a very different socioeconomic status, and our students aren't the same. So it's often not completely an equal comparison, whereas if you look at the schools on this list, they are similar in terms of size, the educational level of the households, and the socioeconomic status of the families. A couple of schools that I think is worthwhile of noting that might be more local that you would recognize, you would probably agree are very similar to us. Warren Local's on the list. Amanda Clear Creek is on the list. And there was one, Minford. I think those were the 3 that when I kind of looked at them, based on what I know of those school districts, I would say that yes, they are very similar in what I know of them to our district. And it made me feel good about comparing ourselves and thinking in terms of how do we compare to those districts with similar barriers and similar strengths as what our district may have. Here is the comparison of the star system based on those different components to those school districts. And you can see it lists them out individually across the board for all those different components that are on our district report card. The progress component, you can see we performed very well. We were one of the only 2, I believe, that actually got 5 stars on that component in similar districts. We have room to grow in the early literacy. We had 2 stars, and you can see they were all the way 2 up to 4. And so it's just nice to have that comparison and a point of reference that's bigger than our scope and our very narrow lens we sometimes have in our area. So the performance index is one of the first measures we look at on the school report card. The performance index, what this looks at is basically every student who takes a test, we are given a weighted number for them. So if a student, for example, scores proficient, they're given a 1, because they're performing where we are expecting them to. If they perform above proficient, they get, I think it varies from 1.2 to 1.4. If they perform below proficient, they can go all the way down to 0 if they're untested. A strength of our district and something that I have personally worked very hard on is we have very, very few students who we do not test. Last year in our entire district, even with all the barriers we had with COVID and different things, we only had 0.4 of our entire district, 0.4% of our entire district did not take a test. That also includes students who are out for medical considerations, students who might be at a different unit outside of our building. But I believe it amounted to something along the lines of 8 to 9 students last year out of our total 1,500 and some who did not take a state assessment. That's a very strong accomplishment. It's a very good thing that helps our report card, because if they do not take a test, it actually is a detriment to us. We get 0 points Whereas if they take a test, they at least get a percentage of the points. Our elementary and our junior high school, the performance index is very similar to our district. Out of the total number of points we could have earned based on that weighted percentage, we earned roughly 75 to 77%. When we are looking at this performance index and spending comparison, the graph on the left, that is comparing us to similar districts. So when you look at us compared to similar districts, our spending, those crosshairs, that's the average. We couldn't be more average in terms of our spending. We are right at the average of similar districts in terms of how much we spend per student. When you look at our performance index compared to similar districts, we are in the bottom half. And so that's, I think, a good comparison and a good thing to keep in mind. But when you go to the graph on the right, we are right in the average of both. I think we literally hit right on the crosshairs of average performance index and average spending compared to the state average. And this is part of the reason why I think it's important to look at that similar district component. It shows we do have room for growth. And I'll tell you, in the last 2 months, our staff has embraced that. We have seen a lot of staff who has really embraced the idea of looking for these weaknesses, looking at the data and using it. We've shifted our TBTs completely around at both ends of the building to truly focus on academic data to help all the teachers grow. This is just another graphic that's showing you, so out of those similar districts that was on that first slide that listed all 20 of them, this is where we fall in the distribution. Our bar is the gray bar. Again, we are in the bottom half. These two graphs are talking about the English language arts achievement and growth by subgroup. As I was saying earlier, we do not have a lot of subgroups. In order to have subgroups, you have to have a certain number of students who actually fall into that subgroup to be able to have a score for that. The only ones who we have enough for in our district is all students, economically disadvantaged, white, and students with disabilities. So there are other subgroups that some schools may have, such as gifted or different things, but we don't have enough students currently to hit any of those subgroups to have comparisons. The graph on the left, if you look at it, what you're seeing is those bars are how we scored in terms of our performance index. The red dot is the goal the state expected us to achieve. So in English language arts, we were actually at or above the performance index that the state expected us for all of our subgroups, which is a very good thing. The graph on the right is looking at our growth. So it's no secret that some of our students may not come in at grade level, for example. They may be a year or 2 years or more behind. And so the state has two different comparisons. They look at, are they achieving where they're expected in terms of proficient or above, or are they growing a year's worth of growth or more? And so that growth index looks at their growth off of their baseline understanding. The red line is where they are the expected growth. So all of our subgroups, except for our students with disabilities for English language arts, were able to hit that growth expectation. Mathematics is very much a similar dynamic. The only difference in the two, for mathematics, the students with disabilities did not meet the achievement goal that the state of Ohio set for us. They also did not meet the growth index. What I'll tell you is that's not out of the norm in terms of what you'll see at other schools, but it's an area that we are focusing on and putting some effort into to try to get to that point. We put a lot of, especially at the elementary level right now, we put a lot of focus on intervention, which I believe we're going to see long-term benefits from once we get kind of under the groove and get going. Performance indicator is the part of the report card that I think makes the most sense to people. Performance indicator basically means what percentage of your students were proficient or above on the assessments. In years past, the state's benchmark across the board for every test was 80%. They said you wanted to have 80% of your students proficient or above. They've actually reined that back in, and that is no longer a standard by the state of Ohio. That's no longer a rated part of the report card, which I think is a good thing, because sometimes that may not be an attainable goal. But what I will tell you is there were years that we hit or were above that 80% on several of the assessments. But you can see across the board, we're anywhere from, it looks like 45% up to just shy of 80% on many of our assessments. We are still down from where we were pre-COVID. I would say we are roughly anywhere from 10% to 25% below where we were on these in terms of how many students are proficient, where we were 2 years ago at this time. This is something we're aware of and we're growing, and I think the good thing about this, even though our numbers aren't where they are right now, that growth indicator is a good indicator for me. It shows that we are making that progress to get back up to a higher level of achievement. So the next two slides are going to look at the performance index. indicators, so how many students were proficient and above compared to the similar districts and the state average. We are the red bar, the blue bar would be similar districts, and the yellow bar would be state average. So if you're looking at across the top left is our third grade. The set of bars on the left side on each of the graphs is mathematics, on the right side is English language arts. So for example, for third grade, when you're looking at that first graph, in mathematics, we are slightly below similar districts in terms of our proficiency level, and it looks like slightly above the state average in terms of our proficiency level. And for language arts, very similar. We're slightly below similar districts, slightly above the state average. I think sometimes we get caught up in comparing ourselves to the state average when I think a similar district should be a better benchmark for us to aim for at this time. Pretty consistently right now, across the board at the elementary level, so third grade through fifth grade, you're going to see a similar trend. We are performing below similar districts, but at or above the state average for the most part. When you start looking at sixth grade through the high school, it's about 50-50. We're above some of the similar districts, and we're below some of the similar districts, and the same thing with the state average. So on this slide, you're seeing seventh grade, eighth grade, and the bottom is high school. So for high school, we have Algebra 1, Biology, U.S. History, English Language Arts 2, Geometry, and Government. Again, a very consistent trend. There are some outliers, obviously, but a lot of the tests, we are below similar districts, but we are pretty much consistently on track with the state average. So here's in comparison, kind of showing you like a rundown of those last two slides. So for English Language Arts, out of the 7 tests that we are required to give, we are outperforming in 2 of the tests compared to similar districts. However, compared to the state average, we are at or above 5 out of the 8 for the state average. So if you look down, compared to the state average, we are doing pretty well. But compared to similar districts, that's not quite as high of a number. Progress component is something that was once called value added, and this is the one that I mentioned. It looks at when a student comes into you, how much growth are they showing, not necessarily how high are they scoring. You'll notice a whole lot of blue on this graph. That is a good thing. So blue is the highest rating you can have. That basically means there's a lot of evidence that our students are showing a high level of growth. I would say that this is not a typical graph for our progress component in years past. I think we're seeing a high level of progress or growth because our students have room to gain. Because we did take a dip the last 2 years because of COVID and the disruptions and the different things that have impacted the learning. And so I do think that this is higher and this is not our norm here. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see quite as high of a level of growth next year. But obviously we're aiming for that same level of growth to continue because we do have room to gain. Green or above is actually, so if you see the light green color, that's actually they meet the expected level of growth. The 2 blue are above expected growth, and obviously yellow and red are below. The gray shaded in boxes means we do not give tests in those areas. So for like science, for example, there's only 3 tests in the state of Ohio we give for science. It's 5th grade, 8th grade, and biology. And then we do not do integrated mathematics. We do algebra and geometry. This is the gifted performance indicator. There are 3 different components of the gifted indicator. The first 2 look at the performance of our gifted students. The first one is progress, and for progress and performance index, we met both those indicators. So what that means is our students who are identified as gifted, they are both growing and performing at a high level that meets the requirements of the state of Ohio per the report card. We did not meet the gifted identification and services component. And what that means is sometimes we have students who are identified as gifted, but they might be not in a situation where they're being classified as served. However, this is something that we are working on. Our teachers get 15 hours of gifted professional development every year. They've done this for the last 4 years now. And what that allows is our general classroom teachers are allowed to basically service students who are identified as gifted as long as they have that appropriate training, and it will count toward this measure. So I'm hopeful that this measure, we could get closer to meeting all 3 of those indicators for next school year. Graduation rate. So this one is worth noting, it lags a school year. And the reason it lags a school year is because they look at the 5-year graduation rate as a part of the component on it. So that 90.9% that you're seeing, that is representative of the class of 2021, not the class of 2022. What I will tell you is when this came out, I personally, with the help of several of our people here, looked into every single student who was classified as not graduating, and there are some extenuating circumstances. None of them did not graduate because of graduation requirements. They all had a very unique situation that made perfect sense when we started going through it, but none of them, it wasn't testing points, it wasn't class grades or anything along those lines that kept them from graduating. The other piece that I think is important for people to understand, for the graduation rate, there are things that actually do not count in the graduation rate that would surprise people. For example, students with disabilities. If a student with disability does not meet the state testing score requirement by the state of Ohio, we can technically exempt them from that requirement through their IEP. They, however, will then count as a non-graduate, even though when they walk across the stage at graduation, they get the exact same diploma and they get an Alexander diploma that walks out of here. But for our graduation rate, they are not reflected as a graduate. Does that make sense? It's one of those things that it threw me for a loop when it first occurred to me, because you would never know that there are usually a couple kids every year that walk across that stage and receive the exact same diploma as the kid in front of them behind them, but we have exempted them from the state requirement of that test through their IEP. The other thing that often counts against us in this graduation rate, students with disabilities can also go for additional services beyond their high school career. They can stay around and do different programs like Project Search and things that go through the vocational school that will then mark them as a non-graduate, and they'll still be on our books for several years. So there's a lot of different factors that go into this. I would also say that 90.9 is not a normal number for us. We are typically around 96%, and I would expect to see that starting to pop back up. Some of the different nuances of this, I think, did come about from COVID complications and different things. But the 5-year graduation rate, I think, is more reflective of what we normally see here. That 96.9% is closer to what we have in a normal year. Here is our graduation rate with the goals by subgroup. Again, you can see we were at or above where the state expected us to be in terms of where they thought our graduation rate should be for each of the different 4 subgroups that we have in our district. The number on the right is our chronic absent percentage. We had 30.9% of our students who were chronically absent last year. The piece that I think is important to understand is we had a lot of students with a lot of different COVID complications that missed more school days than normal last year. I know that this is something that our current truant officer has been working very hard on and keeping track of and trying to bring down this year. Here is our chronic absenteeism rate compared to similar districts. We are high. I mean, I would say we are in the top 50% of similar districts in terms of how many students are labeled as chronically absent. Early literacy. So early literacy is a very complicated measure. In my opinion, it's probably one of the most complicated measures of the school report card. So what it is looking at, you'll see on the right side, it has 4 separate years. In order for them to calculate this rate, we have to look at our students who are identified as off track, and then do we move them to on track within a school year? So year 1 is examining our students from kindergarten to 1st grade. And so it's 2 years worth of data based off of their fall diagnostic. So when students come here in the fall, within the 1st to 2nd week of school, we administer a reading diagnostic to every single student in K through 3. The following year, we do the exact same thing. So when we administer that diagnostic, we identify them as either being off track or on track for their current grade level. If they are off track, what we do is we put them on a reading improvement plan. They go into our intervention program, and they receive extra supports throughout the year. And then the following year, we have to look at them and see if they are now on track based off of the previous year. So if you are looking at that year 1, for example, it says that there were 70% of students in the red bar and 30 in the blue. What that means is our students who we identified as off track, 70% remained off track the next year, 30% of them moved to on track. And you can see it's a pretty consistent trend. We have more students remaining off track when we moved on track. This is something that I know I personally, Mr. Hampton, this is a very large focus of ours. We have steps in place that I think you're going to see some serious impact coming in the years to come. We're working on forming a district-wide K-12 literacy committee that I think the first charge of them, there's some new research around how to instruct reading. And I think that's part of our first refocusing of what is a priority for our district, how do we ensure alignment across the board, and how do we make sure that what we're teaching and how we're teaching is the most appropriate way for students to learn. And so I think that's part of our first step. We're going to be bringing in some reading experts to kind of help us with those processes. We're also working with Shauna Costable, who is a wonderful resource in our district, to do everything we can, strengthen our intervention program, but also strengthen our core instruction program to make sure that all of our students, whether they are off track or even our higher level students, are receiving the appropriate level of instruction to grow. Here's our early literacy component compared to similar districts. Like I said, this is absolutely an area of growth. It's an area that I think we're going to have a lot of focus on in years to come, and it's an area that I know we are all very worried about. The final measure is a college, career, and workforce and military readiness measure. This is a new measure. It is not currently rated. It's informational only. And based on this measure, we have 37.2% of our student body is ready to go into these fields after graduation. So here are the things that they are using to evaluate that measure. I know it's very small. The top several things are ACT and SAT remediation-free scores. That's a very hard benchmark for students to hit. We administer the ACT to every single junior in our district every single year. And what you're going to see up there is how many participated and how many scored that remediation-free score. If I remember correctly, the remediation-free score was something around 25%. It was roughly a quarter of our students hit that percentage. The other ways they can be considered, be prepared for the future, they can get honors diplomas, which a substantial amount of our students do get honors diplomas. They can get industry credentials. Industry credentials are something they typically get when they go to Tri-County. We actually have expanded our offerings. We have one industry credential we are starting to offer this year here. It is a leadership credential called Lean Six Sigma. Ms. Chimo is actually offering it in her class. Her and Mr. Ford went this summer and were trained to be able to offer that. What that allows us to do is, one, it helps with graduation requirements, but it also gives our students some extra skills they need to be prepared for the future. The other thing that we have been focusing on offering additional offerings right now would be there's a work-based learning. So students can get work-based learning hours as well as an Ohio Means Job Readiness Seal, and that would also make them ready. Mr. Schaller and Mr. Miller, so our VOAG teacher and our woodshop teacher, they're kind of spearheading this because they're kind of naturally in a field where this is something that we can easily do. The other options that you'll see on here are things such as apprenticeships, CTE offerings, and different things we do not currently have available here. Apprenticeships are hard for us to do in our building. CTE offerings is something that I know we are exploring and something we would like to see more of, but it's going to take, to get a CTE program in the school, you have to have specifically licensed teachers, when right now we do not have anybody who qualifies. And so that's going to be a long-term, something we're going to have to look at as a district. And then the last page of the report card talks about our staffing levels. Something to take note of, we do hire several of our employees through the Athens Meigs Educational Service Center. They would not be reflected in these numbers. These numbers would be solely the ones who are on the Alexander Local Schools books directly, not the indirect service providers through the ESC. So for example, it says we have 0 gifted intervention specialists. We actually have 1. However, she is hired through the ESC, so it does not show up on this report card. But pretty consistently across the board, we're similar to the state average. There's a couple of them who are a little bit higher than others, but there's nothing that's tremendous outliers in that sense. And then the last page is kind of, the first indicator on here is our PBIS implementation. It says that we are not currently compliant. The reason it says we are not compliant with PBIS, both buildings have to be fully implementing PBIS at a high level at tier 1, 2, and 3 levels. The elementary is compliant. The junior high school, this is something that was on the books to be started rolling in 2019, 2020, and then COVID hit, and we got delayed 3 years, to be honest. However, it is something that has been brought back into the forefront. I know Mr. Raines and Mr. Ford have been working on this, and it's something that I would hope to see us in the next year. We would be compliant on both ends of the building. It's a matter of formalizing procedures, having the different tiers of intervention in place, and having our staff appropriately trained. The wellness and physical education section, we are compliant in terms of having the appropriate things in place. The next 2 indicators are not necessarily requirements, they're just informational pieces that are provided. Some districts elect to administer a BMI screening. After consulting with our teachers and the administration, that's not something that our district thinks is a priority at this time. So we have not elected to administer the BMI, and we're also not a member of the pilot program. On the bottom left, you can see it talks about our enrollment. So the number of students who are enrolled and come here who live in our district is slightly over 1,100. The number of students who live in our district and enroll out, I believe that's 156, if my eyes are not failing me. What I know is right now, our open enrollment, we are in the positive. So the number of students we are losing for open enrollment, we are having more come in based on open enrollment. And then the last one is students enrolled in another public district. I cannot see that far. Oh, I mean, other than open enrollment. And so there's just, if you look at this, if you average it out, we are losing less kids than we're gaining, which is a good thing. The community schools, that 47 you're seeing in the second column, that's online schools. So that's students who have opted to go through things like TRECA or the other options that they can do that are outside of our district, that they're literally unenrolling here and going to an online program. I would say we have seen a slight increase, but not a large increase since COVID of students doing that option. When we came back from being remote, some students stayed remote. That's a normal trend across all school districts right now, though. Any questions?
Nice to see you again.
Very nicely done.
Well done.
Yes. Yes, we have a
Thank
lot of
you.
work to do. This car is spearheading that. We're excited about some of the changes. The early literacy component is a big one, and I'm really excited to get to work on that. Tomorrow, we've got a meeting about setting up a district literacy team, and all that's going to take off.
Fantastic. Good? All set?
Yep,
Good?
I'm good.
All right.
Thank you.
I didn't see any sign up for public participation, so we have the consent agenda. Anything need to be removed from the consent agenda for discussion?
Can I just make a comment, or do we have to formally take it out?
Just, I don't know,
I-
do you want
the-
a discussion?
No,
or is
it's
it-
not really
or-
discussion, I just want the comment. Kim, the 5,000 from the boosters, do you know what that was for?
I do not. The transfer come over and it did not have any explanation. I told them to put it in miscellaneous until we figure out what it was for. I did receive an email today, somebody suggesting it could be from People's Bank and it should be for the ARC Center.
Okay,
I have nothing to support that other than an email from somebody. I put a call into Dan to see if he knows anything or if he can get me in touch with somebody with the boosters, but I did not get a call back from him today.
do we know what the 2,000 is? I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Sorry, I can't say for sure.
Okay,
But it had an explanation, that's why it went straight to the athletics.
it's a pretty good chunk of change,
Yeah,
I
but
know
the
that there was.
5,000, it didn't say.
I know there was some money to be paid by the sponsors. I just was wondering if that was one of them, if we knew.
I was told today through an email that the 5,000 is from People's, but
Okay.
I have nothing other than that to support it, so,
I'll thank them next month. How's that?
okay.
If that's who, I want to make sure we thank the right person.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, then we look for a motion.
Moved?
Seconded.
Roll.
Jay,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yes.
Blake.
Yes. Under items for board approval, we have item A, it's recommended that the Board of Education accept the enclosed letter of resignation from Stacy Witham effective October 12th, 2022. So moved.
Seconded?
Discussion? Roll.
Jay,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yes.
Blake.
Yes. Business initiated by board members. Or board reports. And I don't think we had any public participation on non-agenda items, so I will make an motion to enter executive session for the employment of an employee or official.
Seconded.
Roll.
Jay,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yes.
Blake.
Yes.
Do you expect any action after?
I do not expect any action afterwards.
I think we're live again.
All right. We are back, and I'm looking for a motion for adjournment.
Made.
Second. Roll.
Yes.
Oh, Jay? Josh?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Lucy?
Yes.
Blake?
Yes. Thank you very much. See you next month.
I'm still writing this time down.
8:17.